The Tim Hortons on Barrington Street in Halifax smelled the way it always did on a November morning: burnt coffee and the particular warmth of a room full of people who had nowhere urgent to be. Declan Farrow stood fourth in line, his last 40 in his jacket pocket and his notice of termination printed on company letterhead still folded in his wallet because he had not yet decided what to do with it. Ahead of him, a woman in a gray peacoat was trying to pay for 2 coffees and a bagel with a card the machine kept declining. She tried it a second time, chipside, then a third, tapped. The cashier, a teenager with a name tag that said Bree, said sorry in the way teenagers say sorry when they mean it but cannot help. The woman's voice, when she thanked Bree and started to put the coffees back, was working harder than a voice should have to work at 8 in the morning. Declan stepped forward. He put a 20 on the counter. "I've got hers, and whatever's left, keep it." He did not wait for the woman to turn around. He took his coffee from the pickup counter and pushed through the glass door into the cold. "If you believe that small choices can change everything, stay with us. What happens to Declan next will stay with you." The drive from downtown Halifax to Dartmouth took 12 minutes on a good day. Declan made it in 11. The Civic had one working back window and a heater that worked on the passenger side only, and he drove with one hand and held the coffee cup against his knee for warmth the whole way. He parked in the lot behind the duplex on Ochterlony Street, sat with the engine ticking for a moment, took the termination letter out of his wallet, folded it twice along the same creases, and slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket. Then he walked upstairs. Bridget was at the kitchen table, her backpack already on the floor beside her chair, working through a bowl of oatmeal the way 7-year-olds work through oatmeal. Slowly, without conviction, stabbing at raisins. She had her mother's dark eyes and the particular stubborn expression Declan recognized from the bathroom mirror. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, Bug. You eat the raisins or just move them around?" They moved themselves. He set his coffee on the counter, shrugged out of his jacket and walked past her into the bedroom. He folded the letter into the back of the nightstand drawer. Underneath the paperback he had been reading since August, and 3 birthday cards from Bridget that he could not bring himself to throw away. He stood there with his hand still on the wood of the drawer. Claire used to say he kept too many things. He used to say she was the one who kept things, every receipt, every card, the stubs from every movie they had seen in the first 3 years. Then the accident on the 102 in February 2020. The way the officer had stood in the hallway of the hospital, turning his hat in his hands, not making eye contact. Declan had known before the man said a word. Some things arrive before the language does. He came back to the kitchen, poured the rest of his coffee into a mug, and opened his banking app while Bridget finished the oatmeal. $811. Rent was in 18 days. His last paycheck would clear in 5 business days. The math was not impossible. It was not comfortable with her. "Dad? Is Mrs. Peltier going to pick me up today? She'll be outside at 3. You watch for the blue car." Bridget nodded with the gravity of someone confirming a complex logistical arrangement. She put her bowl in the sink without being asked, which she had started doing 6 months ago and which still caught him off guard, and got her coat from the hook by the door. He walked her downstairs and stood on the step until the school bus disappeared around the corner of Portland Street. Then he went back up and sat at the kitchen table in his jacket and looked at his phone for a long time without dialing anything. He thought about the woman in the gray coat. Not why he'd done it. He knew why he'd done it. He thought about the sound of her voice when she started to put the coffees back. He had heard that sound in himself on a Tuesday morning 4 years ago in a hospital corridor when he had had to call Claire's mother and say the thing that could not be said. He knew the exact pitch of that particular control. Once you hear it in yourself, you recognize it in other people forever. On the Wednesday after the Tim Hortons, Margot Fenn drove back to Barrington Street during her lunch break. She had told herself twice that morning that she was not going to do this. She did it anyway. She asked the cashier. Bree was not on shift, a different girl, with red streaks in her hair, if there was security footage she could request for a customer matter. The girl called the manager. The manager was a compact man named Patrick who wore a wedding ring on his right hand and gave her the footage because she asked in a way that did not require explaining. She watched 4 seconds on his office laptop. A man in a dark jacket stepped forward, laid a bill on the counter, and was out the door before she turned around. The parking lot camera had part of his plate, Nova Scotia, partial enough. By 2 o'clock, she was at her own desk on the 8th floor of Fenn and Associates on Hollis Street, the company her grandfather had built from a single storefront in Antigonish in 1961, and which had been hers, on paper, for 8 months, and in reality, for about 14 minutes when she had stood in the lawyer's office the morning after the funeral and understood what it actually meant to be the last one. She typed the partial plate into a search request she had no official right to run and sent it to the one person and she knew who would run it anyway, her cousin Dex, who worked in provincial licensing and owed her a very old favor. Dex called her back in 20 minutes. Declan Farrow, Dartmouth. She wrote the address on a sticky note, folded it once and put it in her coat pocket. She sat at her desk for the rest of the afternoon and did not entirely read any of the documents in front of her. At 6 o'clock on Thursday evening, she drove to Ochterlony Street. She sat in the car for 2 minutes before she got out. He opened the door and went very still. She held out 2 20s. I wanted to return this. That was a gift. It wasn't. You didn't have it to give. I gave it. That makes it mine to give. She did not put the money away, but she did not push it either. She looked at him for a moment. He looked back at her with the steady, slightly exhausted expression of a man who had made a decision and was not interested in relitigating it. She set the bills on the railing beside the door. Then I'll leave it here. She turned to go. She had made it down 4 steps when she stopped. Through the front window she could see into the kitchen. A small blue jacket hung over the back of a chair, a yellow drawing, a horse, possibly, or a very ambitious dog, was taped to the refrigerator. And on the small table beside the sofa, there was a book she recognized without needing to read the title, because she had the same edition on her own shelf, the spine cracked at the same chapter. Beside it, flat on its face like a man who had fallen asleep at his desk, a back issue of the Canadian Actuarial Journal. She did not have to read the author's name. She already knew it. She climbed back up the steps and knocked. He opened the door with the look of a man who had expected this. I forgot to say thank you, she said. She held his gaze for a single measured moment. Something behind her eyes had moved and was not in the same place it had been 30 seconds ago. Declan noticed. He was not good at a great many things, but he was good at noticing when a person was revising their assessment of him in real time. She went down the steps. When her car reached the end of the block, he looked at the 220s still sitting on the railing. He picked them up. He stood in the doorway a moment longer than he needed to. Then he went inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and opened his laptop. He typed Margot Fenn Halifax. The first result was an obituary. Reginald Fenn, 74, founder of Fenn & Associates, one of Atlantic Canada's oldest independent actuarial firms, survived by his granddaughter. Declan read it once. He sat in the dark kitchen for a long time after. She did not contact him for 4 days. He thought about her almost constantly, and had the self-awareness to know exactly what that meant, and the stubbornness to ignore it. On a Monday morning, his phone rang while he was on his 3rd day of a temp contract at a shipping broker in Bedford, pulling manifests from a filing system that appeared to have been organized by someone working from a personal philosophy rather than any external logic. He stepped out onto the loading dock to take the call. Coffee at 2 if by sea. Dartmouth Cove, 4 o'clock. If you don't come, I won't call again. He came. She was already there, at a corner table, a gray wool cardigan now instead of the coat, a cup in front of her. She had taken off her watch and set it face down on the table beside the cup, and he understood without being told that she had done it intentionally. He sat across from her. He ordered tea. He took the mug with both hands. She did not spend a moment on the weather. Alderton Group has been pressuring my board for 6 months to break apart our pension reserve pool. My grandfather spent 40 years building that pool. It covers approximately 4,700 retired public workers, nurses, municipal employees, fish plant inspectors from 3 counties in Cape Breton who have no other supplemental plan. Alderton's argument is reallocation of capital. Their actual argument is that the pool has a technical vulnerability they believe they can use to trigger a mandatory reserve audit. If the audit opens the way they expect it to, they can argue for divestiture. What vulnerability? A covariance error in the liability projection model. Specifically the kind my risk assessments keep pointing to because I flagged it myself 2 years ago. She looked at him without moving. In a paper, published in the Canadian Actuarial Journal, I flagged it as a theoretical risk in emerging reserve models. I did not expect someone to weaponize it. Declan set down the mug. I need someone who understands that model from the inside. Someone who has thought about the failure modes at the design level, not just in review. My own team knows the surface. They don't know the architecture. She paused. 3 weeks of consulting, $25,000. No documentation with your name. Non-disclosure both sides. After 3 weeks you walk regardless of outcome. He looked out the window at the harbor. A ferry was cutting across the gray water toward the Alderney terminal. I pull manifests at a shipping broker, he said, 8 to 4. I'm home before the school bus. I do that for a reason, I know. Then you know I'm not going back. She did not plead. She did not lean forward. She pushed back her chair and pulled on her coat and put a 20 on the table. He noticed she took a moment finding it. She caught him noticing. 4 days ago, she said quietly. I was in Halifax at a breakfast meeting. My wallet was in my other bag. I don't usually carry cash. I don't usually need to. She walked out. He sat there for 8 minutes. He paid for both drinks with coins and a crumpled 5 from his jacket pocket, the way a man pays when he is doing the arithmetic in his head without being asked to. He drove home and was quieter than usual through dinner. Bridget ate her grilled cheese, watched 20 minutes of a nature program about harbor seals, and asked him why he looked like he was solving a math problem. Because I am, he said. What kind? The kind where you're not sure if the answer is right, even after you check it twice. She thought about this. Arsenal says those are the most important ones, she said, and went back to the seals. That night, he read her 2 chapters of the book about the girl who could talk to animals, doing different voices badly and letting her correct him, which she did with the specificity of an editor. She was asleep before the 2nd chapter ended. He tucked her in, turned off her lamp, and stood in the hallway for a moment. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then he opened the laptop. He searched Alderton Group Halifax, then Alderton Actuarial Reserve, then a name he had seen in the board disclosures Margot's company website linked. Drew Kavanagh, Alderton's lead restructuring partner. The shape of it came up the way these things always came up. Slowly, and then all at once, 3 coordinated letters to Fenn's audit committee over 4 months. Each letter from a nominally independent institutional voice, each citing the same covariance risk, the exact risk Margot had documented herself in a paper Alderton had clearly read with more care than any legitimate investor should have. The letters were designed to force a reserve adequacy review. Once that review was open, Alderton would have the mechanism to argue for emergency divestiture of the pension pool under fiduciary stress. They would walk away with management fees and the secondary buyer's premium. The nurses and the fish plant inspectors from Cape Breton would walk away with the knowledge that the coverage they had counted on was gone. Declan had done a version of this math before. Years ago, in a different context, with numbers that had still felt abstract. They did not feel abstract now. He thought about his father, who had retired from the port at Pictou at 62 and spent 7 years on a supplemental plan that paid for the medications that kept him functional. Without it, those would have been different years. He thought about what different would have meant. He waited until 7 the next morning. He called the number she had called from. She picked up on the first ring. I'll listen, he said. I'm not committing to anything yet, but I'll listen. There was a small silence on the other end. Not relief, exactly. Something older and quieter than relief. Saturday, she said. I'll send you the address. She hung up. He went to his dresser and opened the top drawer and stood looking at the watch Claire had given him the morning he passed his fellowship exam. Gold, thin, with a small engraving on the back that he had memorized years ago and did not need to read anymore. He stood there for the count of 3. He did not put it on. He closed the drawer. He made Bridget pancakes. She asked him what kind of work he was starting. A different kind, he said. For a little while. Is it good work? He thought about 4,700 people who had spent their working lives in schools and hospitals and processing plants along the Cape Breton coast. Yeah, he said. I think it might be. The Fenn and Associates building on Hollis Street had a conference room on the 6th floor with a keypad and no nameplate on the door. The number was known to 4 people in the company. On Saturday morning at 7:30, Declan stepped into that room for the first time. Margot was already there. Across the table from her sat a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair pulled back, reading glasses on a plain chain, and the kind of posture that communicated, without any drama, that she had survived a great number of difficult meetings and expected this to be no exception. This is Carolyn Tate, Margot said. She has been with this firm for 22 years. She was my grandfather's executive director for 18 of them. There is nothing she does not know about this company. No one else in this building knows you are here." Carolyn extended her hand. Her grip was dry and precise. "Mr. Farrow, good to have you." He did not recognize her. He was almost entirely certain he had never met her. He shook her hand and said something appropriate. What he did not know, and what Carolyn did not volunteer, was that 6 years ago she had been in the third row at an actuarial symposium in Moncton, where a younger version of Declan had presented the paper that now sat in Alderton's files. She had thought it was the most rigorous 30-minute talk she had heard in a decade. She had not introduced herself afterward, because the room had been full and he had been surrounded. Her hair had been dark then. She did not expect him to remember a face in a third row. She poured him coffee and sat at the end of the table with a legal pad and a pen she did not uncap. Margot slid 2 black binders across the table. "Everything we have on Alderton's filings to date. Everything we have on our reserve structure and the audit committee correspondence for the past 11 months. He read for 2 hours. He read the way Carolyn recognized from the symposium, nothing in the margins, pen flat on the table, pages turning at uneven intervals, no sound. He stopped once to look out at the harbor. He stopped once to refill his coffee. At the end of the second hour he closed the second binder and looked up. "You have an inside problem." Margot did not move. 3 documents in Alderton's filings contain language that is specific enough to your internal reserve assessment that they could only have come from someone with audit committee access. The phrasing is not the same. It's been run through enough of a paraphrase to look like independent analysis. But the structural argument is identical, and in 2 places the numerical assumptions match your internal numbers to the second decimal point. That does not happen by coincidence. Carolyn set her coffee cup down. The sound it made on the saucer was small and very clear in the room. Margot said very quietly, "Do you know who? I have a candidate. I want to confirm it before I say the name." "Give me 48 hours." He stayed another hour. When he left, Margot did not walk him to the elevator. That evening, in the spare room of the Ochterlony Street duplex that served as something between a home office and a storage area, Declan pulled a hard drive from a shelf he had not touched in 3 years. He plugged it in. Old files, old models. A folder labeled in the naming convention of a person who had once worked in a very organized office. Reserve Architecture 2019. Inside was a version of the liability projection model he had built during a consulting contract that had ended the year before the accident on the 102. He had built it clean. He had documented the covariance issue that Margot had later identified independently. He had flagged it as a future risk in the same paper she had published a year after him, which had cited his work in the footnotes. He had not read his name in those footnotes until tonight. He sat in the small room for a long time. At 10:15 there was a knock at his door. He opened it. Carolyn Tate stood on the landing with a manila folder and an expression that had already pre-apologized for the hour. "I'm sorry for coming this late," she said. "May I come in for a few minutes?" He let her in. She sat only after he sat. She put the folder on the coffee table and did not open it immediately. "Mr. Farrow, I owe you something I didn't give you this morning." She looked at him steadily. 6 years ago, I was at the actuarial symposium in Moncton. I was in the third row when you presented. I did not introduce myself. You will not remember me. I am telling you this only so that what I am about to give you doesn't feel like it comes from nowhere." Declan looked at her. Something that had been unsettled in him since Saturday morning settled slightly. "I don't remember faces from that conference," he said. "I'm sorry. You shouldn't be. I'm telling you because I want you to know that I have been inside this work for a long time. I did not come to this folder from the outside." She opened it. Inside were photocopied pages with careful tab markers, the kind of tabs used by someone who had spent decades organizing other people's documents. On the top page, copied from what was clearly a personal notebook in a small, deliberate older hand, were 4 lines. "Find Farrow. Reserve Architecture. Covariance Paper 2018. Before Alderton moves." His name was underlined twice. Carolyn spoke quietly. "Mr. Fenn began writing those lines approximately 5 months before he died. He contacted 2 restructuring firms in that window. Both had indirect financial relationships with Alderton Group. He could not use either. Your name was the only unencumbered name on his list. He told me over breakfast at his kitchen table in Antigonish that your paper had changed the way he thought about reserve risk and that he could not understand why you had stepped away. I told him I thought I knew, though at the time I knew less than I thought I did. He wanted to contact you himself. He did not want me to do it on his behalf. He sent you a voicemail, September 9th. He died 11 days later. She paused. He had a clean cardiac panel 8 months before. He was not a man who dropped without warning. I am not accusing anyone of anything, Mr. Farrow. I have no evidence that would survive a serious challenge. I am telling you what I know, and I am telling you what I do not know, and I am leaving what sits between them where it belongs. In the dark for now. She closed the folder and pushed it toward him. I promised him I would keep your name out of this until Margot needed it. She needs it now. She stood. Good night, Mr. Farrow. Thank you for the coffee I didn't drink. She let herself out. He sat with the folder on his lap. He opened his phone and found the voicemail he had not listened to. He had not recognized the number, had meant to call back, had not, and then Claire's mother had phoned 2 weeks later to say she'd heard about his position and was he all right. And the voicemail had submerged under everything else and stayed there. He pressed play. An older man's voice, measured and slightly apologetic. Mr. Farrow, my name is Reginald Fenn. I have read your 2018 paper 3 times, and your 2021 response to the Kershaw critique twice. I am not asking you to return to anything. I am asking you to call me before something happens that cannot be undone. My number is... He sat in the quiet apartment for a long time. At 11:40 he called Margot. She picked up on the first ring. They were on the phone for 28 minutes. They spoke for perhaps 4 of them. The rest was the particular silence of 2 people who have just understood something at the same time and are waiting to see if the other one has understood it too. She did not ask him directly. He did not say it directly. When they hung up, neither of them needed to. He went in at 7 every morning through the side entrance on Granville Street, took the stairs to the 6th floor, and worked in the unmarked room until 3:30. He was always out by 3:45 and home, before Bridget's bus reached the corner of Ochterlony and Dahlia. For 8 days he did very little else. What he built in 3 layers. The first was structural. He moved the pension reserve pool out of Fenn and Associates' direct corporate balance sheet and into a standalone actuarial trust governed by a separate 3-person oversight board. 2 independent fellows from the Canadian Institute of Actuaries and a retired provincial court judge from Sydney who had spent the last decade reviewing pension disputes and had the patience of someone who had heard every argument twice. The trust's founding charter contained a clause he wrote himself and had Margot's outside counsel read twice before filing. Any attempt to liquidate, sell, restructure, or materially alter the trust within 14 years would trigger automatic disbursement of the full reserve value to the beneficiaries at par. There would be nothing left for Alderton to extract. The second layer was procedural. He embedded a 75% supermajority requirement for any liquidation event in the trust's lifetime. The Fenn family interests, between Margot's direct holdings and the charitable trust her grandfather had established in '87, controlled 39% of voting shares. Reginald had cultivated relationships with another 22%, not through personal loyalty but through the kind of quiet, patient credibility that takes decades to build, and that Margot had not fully understood until she sat across a table from 3 board members who, when she explained what she was doing and why, simply nodded and said they were in. The third layer was a tripwire. He drafted a fiduciary breach provision that would activate automatically if any officer or director signed any document materially related to the sale, restructuring, or divestiture of the pension pool without unanimous board consent. The trigger removed them for cause, stripped them of outstanding compensation, and indemnified the company against their actions. He built it with one name in mind: Thomas Gregg, Fenn & Associates Chief Investment Officer, who had joined the board 2 years ago after a previous position at a firm that had since received 2 tranches of Alderton Group capital. On the 5th day, Carolyn gave him the access logs, 6 documents over 4 months, all transmitted from Gregg's device to an encrypted personal address. The address, traced through 2 layers of numbered company, resolved to a beneficial owner registered in New Brunswick that was a wholly owned subsidiary of Alderton Group's secondary acquisition vehicle. The 6th document was Fenn & Associates' own internal actuarial reserve assessment, their most current, most granular analysis of the covariance vulnerability. Sent 11 days before Alderton's most recent letter to the audit committee, which had cited an internal actuarial assessment by name. Declan did not call anyone in law enforcement. That was not the fight. The fight was a Tuesday morning board meeting. On Monday evening at 9 o'clock, he took the stairs to the 8th floor to drop off the final draft. Margot was in her grandfather's office at the far end of the hall. Glass on two sides, a view west over the Arm, the lights of the Armdale Rotary blinking in the low distance. She was standing at the window with her back to the door. He came in and put the draft on the desk without saying anything. She did not turn around. The building breathed around them. "He should be here for this," she said. Declan stood one step behind her shoulder. He did not touch her. "He built the thing you're protecting," he said. "That's why it's still worth protecting." She didn't answer. After a moment, she said, "Go home to your daughter." He went home to his daughter. At 11:50, his phone lit up. A text from Margot. "3 documents need a witness signature. Notary is available tomorrow morning. Can she come to you?" 8 o'clock. He wrote back, "Fine." He did not sleep well. He lay on the sofa and thought about the reserve pool and the Cape Breton nurses and a retired fish plant inspector who had spent 30 years in a processing facility in Glace Bay and had no other supplemental plan. He thought about his father at the port in Pictou. He thought about the sound of Margot's voice at the window saying he should be here for this, the specific weight that sentence carried, the way it was not asking for anything. At 7:50 on Tuesday morning, he was already in the kitchen in old jeans and a flannel shirt, the griddle on, a bowl on the counter. He had not thought carefully about whether this was an appropriate situation for pancakes. It seemed like the right thing. Bridget came downstairs at 7:54 in her pajamas with the penguins on them, stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked out the front window. "Dad, there's a car." "I know, Bug. It's a work thing." "What kind?" "A good kind." The doorbell rang. Bridget reached it first, because she always reached the door first, pulled it open, and looked up at the woman on the step with the frank, unembellished assessment that 7-year-olds perform on strangers who matter. "You're the Tim Hortons lady," Bridget said, "from the coffee place." Margot, who had not anticipated this, stood very still. "Dad said you needed a coffee and your card didn't work." "That's the one," Margot said. "You should come in," Bridget said. "We're having pancakes." Margot came in. The notary, a tired man with a briefcase and a stamp that had seen better decades, arrived 6 minutes later. Witnessed 3 signatures, accepted the offer of coffee with the quiet gratitude of a man who had driven from Sackville on short notice, and left. He had been in the apartment for 11 minutes. After he was gone, no one moved immediately. Declan set a plate in front of Bridget. He set a plate across from her where Margot was sitting. He sat down with his own. "Do you like syrup?" Bridget asked. "I do, from the bottle or the little jug." Margot thought about this as though it were a question with real stakes. "From the bottle, on top." Bridget gave this a single approving nod. "That's the right way." She told Margot about the classroom hamster whose name was Captain, and who had escaped twice and been found once behind the radiator and once inside a running shoe belonging to a boy named Kyle, and who had bitten Kyle on the thumb both times he had tried to retrieve it, which Bridget seemed to feel was fair. Margot listened to all of it. When Declan put down his coffee mug, he put it down a half-second slower than usual, and Margot was looking at him exactly then, and she saw it, and she looked at her plate and did not say anything. They ate for 40 minutes. Nobody said the word Alderton. Nobody said the word Greg. Nobody said the word board. Outside the kitchen window, the November light moved over the roofline of the building across the street in the way Tuesday morning light moves when there is no particular emergency. At 9:10, Margot said she had to go. Bridget walked her to the door because she had decided this was the kind of guest you walked to the door. She stood on the landing and watched the car until it turned at the end of the block. Then she turned to Declan. "Is she coming back?" He crouched down so they were at the same level, the way he always did when the answer was going to take a second. "I hope so," he said. "I really do." Bridget considered this with the seriousness it deserved. She laughed at the part about Captain and the shoe, she said. "That's a good sign," he said. "I think it might be." She went upstairs to finish getting ready for school. He stood in the kitchen for a moment longer, looking at 3 plates, a syrup bottle, and the particular quiet of a room where something has shifted without anything having been said about it. The Fenn and Associates board met on the 8th floor at 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning in a long room with 10 chairs and a framed map of Nova Scotia from 1947 that Reginald Fenn had found at an estate sale in Lunenburg and hung on the wall himself. 10 seats, 8 board members, 2 non-voting attendees, Drew Kavanagh, in his capacity as representative of Alderton Group's equity position, and Thomas Gregg, in his capacity as chief investment officer. Carolyn stood at the back with a manila folder and an expression that gave nothing away, because she had spent 22 years cultivating an expression that gave nothing away. Margot opened the meeting. She did not raise her voice. She sat, read a 2-paragraph statement into the minutes, and placed a single document in the center of the table. The Fen Retirement Reserve Trust had been formally constituted and registered with the Nova Scotia Registry of Joint Stocks as of 7:40 that morning. The pension pool, all 4,700 beneficiaries, all reserve assets, had been transferred by valid corporate action into the independent trust's governance as of 5 o'clock the previous evening. The transfer was lawful, complete, and irreversible within 14 years without a 75% supermajority of Fen and Associates Class A shareholders. The silence in the room lasted approximately 4 seconds. Drew Kavanagh stood up. He was a compact man with the particular confidence of someone who had prepared for a meeting he no longer needed to prepare for. He got 3 words out. The side door opened. Declan Farrow walked in wearing a dark jacket and the plain dress shirt he had ironed at 6 that morning. He carried a single folder. He stopped at the near corner of the table. Margot did not look at him. She said, for the record, "I'd like to introduce the architect of the trust structure I just described, Mr. Declan Farrow, Fellow of the Canadian Institute of Actuaries, author of the 2018 paper on liability covariance risk in reserve pool architecture, and author of the defense structure Alderton Group has been attempting to exploit for the past 6 months. Kavanagh's face did not move. Declan opened the folder. He took out a printed copy of the paper. He set it gently on the table. "I wrote the model your strategy is built on, Mr. Kavanagh," he said. "I also spent the last 8 days writing the reason it won't work. I thought it seemed fair to introduce them to each other." Kavanagh sat down. Margot nodded once to Carolyn. Carolyn walked the length of the table and placed her manila folder in front of Thomas Gregg. He opened it. He read for 11 seconds. Margot said very quietly, "You have 90 minutes to clear your office, Mr. Gregg. The audit committee will be in touch by the end of the week. You will not sign anything on behalf of this company between now and then. Security is in the hall." Gregg stood up. He straightened his jacket. He left the room without speaking, which was, Declan thought, probably the most dignified choice available to him. Kavanagh, looking at no one in particular, said, "Alderton would like to formally withdraw its restructuring proposal of the 14th. Margot said, "The minutes will reflect that." The meeting adjourned at 9:43. It had taken 43 minutes. 3 weeks after the Tim Hortons on Barrington Street, on a Wednesday morning in late November, Margot Fen walked Declan Farrow down the corridor to the 6th floor. She stopped at the last door, the office that had been her grandfather's and had not been properly occupied since September. She opened it. She held out a small ring of keys. "The board voted this morning. Unanimous. Chief Actuarial Officer, Co-Chief Executive, both," she paused. "Including the 2 members who were closest to Alderton 6 months ago, including the one who voted against my appointment last spring." He took the keys. "This isn't for the $40, she said. "I know. It's for the fact that you were going to give back the $40 on a day when technically you needed it as much as I did." He went into the office. He did not go to the desk immediately. He walked the perimeter first. The window facing west, the bookshelf that still held his grandfather's small objects, the framed map of Antigonish County that Margot had moved from the hall because she said it belonged in here. When he came to the desk, he opened the top drawer by reflex, the way you open a desk drawer in a room you expect to be in for a long time. Inside, folded once, was a $20 bill, and beside it a small card in Margot's handwriting, the date, the name of the street, and nothing else. She had never spent it. He looked at it for a moment. He closed the drawer. She was watching him from the doorway. He looked up. Neither of them said anything. They did not need to. That afternoon at 3:50, Bridget Farrow came through the lobby doors of the Fen and Associates building in her red winter coat, holding Carolyn Tate's hand. Carolyn had picked her up from school because Margot had asked her to, and because Carolyn, who had no grandchildren and a very organized schedule, had found that she did not entirely mind this kind of task. Margot was waiting in the lobby. She crouched down. "Hi, Bridget." "Hi." Bridget studied her with the careful attention she reserved for important things. "Are we doing pancakes on Saturday? Same syrup rules?" Same syrup rules, Bridget confirmed, with the solemnity of someone closing a formal agreement. Declan was standing 2 steps back. He watched his daughter nod with the gravity of a person who has decided something and is satisfied with the decision. When Margot straightened up, she stepped back half a step, and the back of her hand moved past the back of his. It lasted less than a second. They both looked at the floor for a beat and did not say anything about it. Then the three of them walked together toward the elevator. He had given her $40. On a morning he could not spare it. She had given him a place to come back to. On a morning she could not have rebuilt without him. Neither of them named it out loud. They had each learned, in their own way, that the things which last are almost never the ones that get said.